Hi, freshmen. Your summative sonnet is due this week, Friday. And for our other lessons this week, we are going to begin reading one of my favorite books of all time, which is Lord of the Flies. So we essentially have 4.5 weeks of school left. Our book is 12 chapters long. We'll read the first chapter this week, 3 chapters a week until our final week of school, where we'll only have to read 2 chapters. So while we are reading this book, I have both a full text to share with you online, and there is also a multitude of audio versions of the book. So you can actually play around on YouTube and figure out if you're going to listen to it the audio book, you can figure out which voice you like the best. During our unit, we are going to focus on three major literary terms. The first is characterization. There's a lot of interesting characters in this book. We're going to focus on 5 of them. We'll look at the way in which they're described, what they do, what they think, and then how they're treated by others as a way of understanding them and figuring out what William Golding, our author's message is about each of those characters. We're also going to take a look at symbolism. There are quite a few objects in this book that mean more than the object itself. So we'll look at those for meaning. And finally, we'll focus on imagery, which is if you have like a tree, it's the way in which an author describes that tree using our senses. So sight, smell, taste, touch. Sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. Okay. So my plan is I'm going to read the first couple of pages of the book, and then I'm going to set you free to either read on your own or listen to an audio version. But I want to start off the book with you to clarify a couple of things. And even before I start reading, there are 3 terms I want to talk about. So throughout the book, William Golding, our author, refers to something called the scar. So the scar is where the boys landed on the island in a plane crash. So the boys were in a plane. They were being evacuated from England, and somebody shot their plane down. The plane crashed on the island, and the area where the plane crashed is the scar. So there's going to be like maybe some burnt wood, some broken trees, maybe some exposed dirt. So the scar is where the plane landed. Since the plane landed, the ocean waves came in and took the plane back out to sea. So we can see where the plane crashed, but we don't know. But the plane is now no longer on the island. Okay. The second term is creepers. So the island is uninhabited except by animals. There are no humans. And because of this, a great deal of wilderness and undergrowth has developed. So the floor of the island is just covered with overgrown weeds and tree branches and ivy and all of that stuff. And sometimes it can be hard to navigate through. Finally, at the end of this chapter, Piggy's going to find a conch. A conch is this gorgeous shell. And if you blow into one end of the conch, it makes a loud noise. I hope you enjoyed that. All right, so we are going to start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 is called The Sound of the Shell. And the shell to which that title is referring to is the conch I just told you about. All right. The boy with fair hair lowered himself down the last few feet of rock and began to pick his way toward the lagoon. Though he had taken off his school sweater and trailed it now from one hand, his gray shirt stuck to him and his hair was plastered to his forehead. All around him, the long scar smashed into the jungle was a bath of heat. He was clambering heavily among the creepers and broken trunks when a bird, a vision of red and yellow, flashed upwards with a witch-like cry. And this cry was echoed by another. "Hi," it said. "Wait a minute." The undergrowth at the side of the scar was shaken, and a multitude of raindrops fell, pattering. "Wait a minute," the voice said. "I got caught up." The fair boy stopped and jerked his stockings, with an automatic gesture, as in he's pulling up his socks. So the book was written in 1954. These schoolboys, who are all 12 and younger, are wearing shorts, but then they're also wearing socks that come up close to their knees, as was the style at the time. So he leans over, he pulls up his socks, and when it says here, that made the jungle seem for a moment like the home countries. The home countries are Europe, specifically England. The voice spoke again. I can't hardly move with all these creeper things. The owner of the voice came backing out of the undergrowth so that twigs scratched on a greasy windbreaker. The naked crooks of his knees were plump, caught and scratched by thorns. He bent down, removed the thorns carefully, and turned around. He was shorter than the fair boy and very fat. He came forward, searching out safe lodgments for his feet, and then looked up through thick spectacles. Where's the man with the megaphone? The fair boy shook his head. This is an island. At least I think it's an island. That's a reef out in the sea. Perhaps there aren't any grown-ups anywhere. The fat boy looked startled. There was that pilot, but he wasn't in the passenger cabin. He was up in front. The fair boy was peering at the reef through screwed-up eyes. All them other kids, the fat boy went on. Some of them must have got out. They must have, mustn't they? The fair boy began to pick his way as casually as possible toward the water. He tried to be offhand and not too obviously uninterested, but the fat boy hurried after him. Aren't there any grown-ups at all? I don't think so. The fair boy said this solemnly, but then the delight of a realized ambition came over him. In the middle of the scar, he stood on his head and grinned at the reversed fat boy. No grown-ups. The fat boy thought for a moment. That pilot. The fair boy allowed his feet to come down and sat on the steamy earth. He must have flown off after he dropped us. He couldn't land here, not in a place with wheels. We was attacked. You'll be back all right. The fat boy shook his head. When we was coming down, I looked through one of them windows. I saw the other part of the plane. There were flames coming out of it. He looked up and down the scar. And this is what the cabin done. The fair boy reached out and touched the jagged end of a trunk. For a moment, he looked interested. What happened to it? He asked. Where's it got to now? The storm dragged it out to sea. It wasn't half dangerous with all them tree trunks falling. There must have been some kids still in it. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. What's your name? Ralph. The fat boy waited to be asked his name in turn, but this proffer of acquaintance was not made. The fair boy, called Ralph, smiled vaguely, stood up, and began to make his way once more toward the lagoon. The fat boy hung steadily at his shoulder. I expect there's a lot more of us scattered about. You haven't seen any others, have you? And now Piggy, who we're about to meet, is talking about the other boys. Who else was in the plane? Ralph shook his head and increased his speed. Then he tripped over a branch and came down with a crash. The fat boy stood by him, breathing hard. My auntie told me not to run, he explained, on account of my asthma. Asthma? That's right. Can't catch my breath. I was the only boy in our school what had asthma, said the fat boy with a touch of pride. And I've been wearing specs since I was 3. He took off his glasses and held them out to Ralph, blinking and smiling, and then started to wipe them against his grubby windbreaker. An expression of pain and inward concentration altered the pale contours of his face. He smeared the sweat from his cheeks and quickly adjusted the spectacles on his nose. Them fruit. He glanced around the scar. Them fruit, he said. I expect. He put on his glasses, walked away from Ralph, and crouched down among the tangled foliage. I'll be out again in just a minute. Ralph disentangled himself cautiously and stole away through the branches. In a few seconds, the fat boy's grunts were behind him, and he was hurrying toward the screen that still lay between him and the lagoon. He climbed over a broken trunk and was out of the jungle. All right, I think I'm going to stop there. I want to point out some of the differences that we see between Ralph and Piggy. So we've got Ralph, who is described as fair-haired. And fair is another way of, well, in Romeo and Juliet, if somebody is fair, they're beautiful. But in William Golding's time, fair would be used to describe somebody who is blonde or kind of light-colored. So we've got Ralph, who seems kind of uninterested. He walks casually. He's not really interested in talking with this other boy. And it definitely seems to be like excited about the fact that there are no grown-ups. And then on the other hand, we've got this other kid. We're about to find out his name is Piggy. Piggy is shorter. He's fat. He wears glasses. He has asthma. So he seems to have all these things that socially, sorry, everybody, that socially are working against him. But at the same time, Piggy's the one that knows what's going on. He's concerned about the other boys who might be on the island. He's concerned about whether or not there are grown-ups. He's concerned about what happened to the boys who were on the plane. He's even aware that the plane was attacked and they weren't like dropped off or delivered there, like Ralph kind of assumes they have been. So despite Piggy's social disadvantages, he's the kid that has a higher level of awareness of the situation that they're in. Ralph is, standing on his head, excited about the fact that there are no grown-ups. All right, so I'm going to turn you over to the audio now, or you can continue reading from here on your own. I'm going to have 3 questions that I want you to answer about chapter 1. So between reading and or listening to this chapter and answering the 3 questions, that's going to take us to Friday of this week. So depending on the audio you use, some of the audios are, upwards of 35 or 40 minutes for this chapter. So considering a half an hour a day between the chapter, why am I still talking, between the chapter and then also answering the questions, we're going to call that our week 5. And then next week, we'll tackle 3 more chapters. As always, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate it. Let me know how I can help you.